the one thing I really valued about running, and I still value about running this business with my sisters, was especially during lockdown, it gave me an opportunity to actually spend time with my siblings and my mum. And I think without Puff Puff Ministry, without us running a business during lockdown, that would have been almost impossible to actually see your friends, see your family. So that's something that was really, really beneficial to me, and probably like kept me sane for most of lockdown, to be honest.
For us, that's where the cultural element of the business comes in. It's not so much in our mindset of how we run a business. That is ultimately the fundamentals, the basics. But it's, we're bringing a cultural product. How do we make sure that this is a successful product in a market where there's so many other cuisines to compete with? So that's then where we think, okay, who are we targeting? How do we make sure that this product appeals to not just the West Africans or the Black community, but also anybody who happens upon our business?
Hello and welcome to the Black Income Creators Podcast. I'm Max, and today I've got the Puff Puff Ministry founders. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Max. So I'm Marianne. I'm one of the co-founders of Puff Puff Ministry, which is a West African donut brand that we launched using our mum's 20-year-old recipe.
And I'm Yossie. I'm also one of the co-founders of Puff Puff Ministry. We're a group of sisters, and as Marianne said, we run the business based on our mum's recipe.
So could you just explain what Puff Puff is? So I'm South African. We have Puff Puff, but we call it amagwinya. And it's the same kind of idea. But just explain to those the Westerners out there that might not know.
Yeah, the great thing about Puff Puff is, like you said, it exists in pretty much every country around the world. It's kind of like rice. Like every country has their version of rice. So Puff Puff is essentially West Africa's version of a fried dough ball. So we actually like to say that they're like donuts, but better. And the reason we say that is because donuts can be quite like light and airy. And I think a lot of the essence of donuts oftentimes comes from like the toppings and the coating. Whereas Puff Puff is it has more of a chewy texture, and it has spices in it like cinnamon and nutmeg. So unlike a classic donut, Puff Puff in its original form is already quite flavorful with those spices in there. And so it does have that nice chewiness to it, which feels like you're really eating something. It just feels a bit more tangible sometimes. So that's why we like to say that they're like donuts, but better. That's the best way to describe what Puff Puff essentially is. But it's just a traditional street snack that you'll find across the continent. And yeah, our mom has always had a great recipe for it. And so that's how the business started.
Okay. And you said it was like a group of sisters. How many of you are there?
So there are actually 5 daughters in our family, but there are 4 of us actively running the business because our other sister, she was like, I think she had the right idea. She was like, listen, I don't like stress in my life, and running a business does not match up with like a stress-free life. And we were like, okay, fair enough. So, she was like, yeah, you guys go ahead. I'm supporting you all, all the way. And she's always there, like all of our events and everything, but she's just not like actively in the business. So there are 4 of us running Puff Puff Ministry day by day.
And at the moment it's very busy, but it's a side hustle, isn't it? So all of you have got your 9 to 5s, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. I feel like Yossie can take this one because she describes this quite well in terms of like, because that we actually don't often describe it as a side hustle, and there's a reason for that. But I'll let Yossie lead on this one.
Yeah, no, I think the way that I would describe the business and the stage is that we're in the growing phase. So it's a growing business, and we're trying to get it to a place where we can scale. And so at this point and in this moment where it's growing, we are working, we have 9 to 5s that support us while we're building the business as well. So it's not so much a side hustle. We're actually trying to build a business that will one day be global, international, serving customers across the country and one day across the world.
Yes, like that's honestly like the big dream is imagine, a West African version of Krispy Kreme, or like almost like that McDonald's formula where it literally exists around the world. That is like ultimate big dream. So yeah, it is a really exciting journey for us. And so like Yossie said, while we, work towards getting to that position, we are then just, straddling our jobs as well. And actually, I work as a freelance consultant, so that also gives me more time to actually dedicate to Puff Puff Ministry, which is why which is why we don't often describe it as a side hustle, just because there are still moments. It's not quite like a weekend gig, basically. It's pretty much every day or every day there's like emails coming in. So it feels like very much a full-time business.
Well, there's two things that strike me. Are any of your sort of 9 to 5-ish jobs linked to Puff Puff Ministries at all? And second is like, how do you manage running a business as a family? Because obviously there's dynamics in a family, and then there's, business dynamics, so like CEO, whatever. So how do you do that? So let's start with the first one first.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the reason I love that question of, how do our actual professional careers tie into Puff Puff Ministries, because I actually think that is the reason for Puff Puff Ministry's success so far, because of our professional careers and the skills that we've gained. So myself and Yossie, we have a professional background in communications and marketing. So I actually run a marketing agency now, which I actually started off the back of Puff Puff Ministry, because because Puff Puff Ministry grew really quickly, to be honest, much more quickly than we thought it would, because we knew that this was a new product in the dessert market. We thought, it would be a long process of educating the market. A lot of Africans are used to eating Puff Puff straight from the pot, fresh, from the, so I was coming out and being like, hey guys, you can get Puff Puff delivered anywhere in the UK the next day. And everyone's like, no, that is an abomination. So we knew that we were going like a long road ahead. But a week or two after we launched officially, people started asking us if we could post to them in Scotland, in Northern Ireland, etc. So we started off just as in North London, sending boxes for collection in our local area. And so we had to scale the business really quickly because of that demand. Going back to, how that actually happened, I would say it was because of our marketing expertise and branding. We actually had the idea for Puff Puff Ministry before we officially launched it. We registered the business in 2019. And I remember Yossie ran straight to company's house, got everything sorted. We secured all our social media handles and everything. And then we had to spend a year on testing the recipe, figuring out our branding, our packaging. And so that was where our professional skills actually then really came together from that beginning. So, myself and Yossie on the branding, the brand positioning, how, the tone of voice, what colors, what should our logo look like? How do we describe this product to people? Just the whole brand ecosystem for the business. And then Fola, she has actually worked, when she was at university, Fola is our youngest sister. When she was at university, she worked in a ton of burger restaurants across London. So she had that hospitality experience within the UK. And in a professional career, she works in urban planning and smart cities consulting. So she has that really nice, innovative experience in terms of how to also use tech to innovate, basically. So Fola, because of that experience of working in restaurants and also working in this innovation space, she is honestly the brains behind Puff Puff Ministry being able to actually ship boxes of Puff Puff across the UK safely and having them arrive to people the same way they left our kitchen. So, and that was one of the hardest things to figure out, because one of the things we wanted to make sure was that when people get that box, it's still, it hasn't completely, because we're sending it via Royal Mail, and we all know how Royal Mail drivers just chuck parcels around. So we have to figure out, how to make sure that fit really well. And then we have another sister, Lola, who's the oldest, and she has experience. She's actually doing a PhD at the moment. And so she also has experience in human resourcing. So that is really how our skills came together.
Okay. So Yossie, around the family dynamics then, because, I've got 2 siblings, working with them, I don't know, there would be, this, I'm the eldest, so I have my own dynamic, I suppose, that I bring to the party, so how does that work for the 4 of you?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So thinking back to the beginning, and Marianne always says that, we've always been close as sisters, but we'd never quite worked together. And it's quite different when you're taking a personal relationship into a professional setting, and running a business is very much being professionals. And so what we realized was the way we are as sisters is very different to how we are as professionals, working professionals, delivering on objectives. And so in the early days, I think we saw a bit of a clash in terms of just expectations. So one person may think that something is urgent and the other person doesn't think it's urgent. And so we had to figure out, okay, how do we actually balance things out? For example, even things like the email management. So for example, if someone decided to respond to an email or, not respond to an email, we don't know who's actually handling what. And so we had to come up with a process. So for example, what's it called? Sort of tags and labels. So assigning particular emails to certain people. So when you go into the inbox, you know that this email, it belongs to you. It's your responsibility to address it. Also things like just setting meetings up. I think we used to just have general conversation because we have group chats everywhere, Telegram, WhatsApp, even Instagram. And so it's like having conversations just on the fly. And we were like, no, we need to think about this as a work setting. So what will happen is because we're cutting, we're not really thinking about things in a structured way. And so again, we had to then set up sort of weekly meetings, like, the team catch up. So sometimes it was Sunday, sometimes Monday. So every meeting day, we come together, there's an agenda, we go through everything. So what we've just had to do was bring in some structures to make sure that we weren't just treating this as, oh, this is just a family thing that's happening. It's not structured. There's no organization, but actually we have objectives to meet. We have targets, we have deliverables. Even deliverables is just responding to a query and creating an invoice for a potential customer. That is a deliverable. It may seem like, oh, this is just, we're doing this business. Just tell them this is the price, but now you actually have to let them know this is what you can expect based on your inquiry. This is the cost. This is the delivery time scale. These are our prices, that sort of thing. We even had to create, a price tag because again, we had things in our heads, but you can't run a business on the basis of what's in someone's head. So yes, so that's how we sort of managed it. And I think, it was a learning experience for us as well, because many of us have different priorities and responsibilities. I have a family, my older sister has a family, some people don't have families. So it's also being compassionate and sort of thoughtful about what somebody else may be dealing with. So for example, if Marianne thinks something is to be done in 10 minutes, but you have to do bedtime, you're not going to do in 10 minutes. So it was just, making sure everyone was on the same page about, okay, we're not always going to have the same priorities at the same time. So let's just be sort of thoughtful, compassionate about, what other people are doing and considerate, sorry. So yeah, that's I guess that's how I would summarize the family dynamic. And it's a continuous learning experience, right? Things happen, things change, work becomes busy for some people, whereas other people have more free time. So it just means that we're just, paying attention to that. And so if someone's really busy and can't do what they're typically supposed to do, someone else steps in to, take over that piece of work in the time that they need to be away. So we're continuously sort of growing and learning how to work together as sisters.
Is it difficult when you meet up to not talk about it? Do you see what I mean? So like if you're meeting up for like a family lunch or dinner or something like that, does the business sort of seep in and sort of, oh, by the way, you need to, you know what I mean? Is it quite difficult to switch off from work then?
No, I don't think so. I think we tend to keep sort of serious business conversations to the meetings, and we also have a business group chat as well. So if it's something immediate, we can say that in that group chat, which is different from the general group chat, because bear in mind, not all the sisters are involved in the business. So we can't bring business into the general group chat because they're the ones like, I'm getting all these notifications and I'm not involved in this. I don't want to do that. So we have group chats for the business as well. So, but when we're together in person, I think we're always thinking about new ideas. So that's like part of our general conversation. I think I guess we're very interested in the fact that we just talk about work, life, policy, ideas. So we could be together in person and maybe we see something and we're like, oh, that's a nice idea for us to explore for Puff Ministry. But we don't sort of turn that conversation into, okay, let's start making plans. No, it's just, okay, note it down and then in our next meeting, we can bring it up. So that's sort of the way it works. I think it's a natural flow. We'll just talk about anything that pops up in the moment.
Okay. And just in terms of the name, so who came up with the name? How was that sort of brainstormed? What names did you disregard?
That was our dad, actually, which is quite interesting. I think, I don't know what was happening. It was 2019, and we were having a family discussion, just thinking about like life and legacy. And our dad, because we're thinking about, what can we do? Because our mom ran a bakery. She did everything: wedding cakes, cookies, bread, all sorts of things. And I was thinking, okay, what can we do to continue that legacy in the UK that's different from what's out there? Every bakery probably does brownies and cakes and cookies. So we're thinking, and you can even, before you even get to the bakery level, any supermarket has their own section of, their own sweet treats. And so we thought, what can we bring to the UK market that is different and interesting? And our dad was like, oh yeah, your mom makes really nice puff puff. You can set up puff puff ministry. And we were like, oh, puff puff ministry. That actually sounds really good. So that's when, like Marianne said, I ran to companies. I thought, okay, we have to secure this. I don't care how it's going to work, what it looks like, but I think this is the winning formula. And so I just registered the name because I thought, this is it. And that's why Marianne said it took us a year from registration to actually launching, because we just had the name and we're like, okay, I think that's the business. It makes sense. It's different, and we can innovate this product in a way that really stands out in the UK market. So let's just get it sort of locked down and then figure out the rest of it afterwards. And so that's sort of how it happened.
And unfortunately, I think you were in lockdown for the majority of that first year, weren't you? So how did that, I mean, I guess it gave you the time to really think through strategies and what you wanted to do with it, but did it in any way impede the start of it? Because it was like you said, 2019, you sort of registered.
Yeah, so we registered in 2019 around, I think it was like summertime, but then we launched the business officially on the 1st of August 2020. So that was when we then started actually producing. In terms of lockdown, didn't really impede as much because we launched it as a postal delivery business. In fact, that was really like what really helped Puff Puff initially get off the ground. A lot of people were stuck at home, couldn't see their family and friends. So it was like a nice way to send a gift and send your well wishes to someone by ordering a box of desserts or sweet treat for them. And so even till today, the majority of our delivery or postal delivery orders are still as gifts. So that gifting element is really, really central to the business. And that was the whole idea behind it, is that you get the chance to actually share the joy of West African flavors with your loved ones, family, friends, colleagues, no matter where they are in the country. And that is one of the things that still till tomorrow makes Puff Puff Ministry truly unique, is that we've actually been able to figure out how to safely ship a product that people are used to eating fresh, ship that around the country. So in terms of, the only thing that I would say was quite challenging with lockdown was because Fala lived at home and we all lived out of the home. So it was a bit challenging, like trying to find the time to produce together. But luckily we had a shared commercial kitchen in Woodgreen. And so you could have like 2 or 3 people in the kitchen at a time. So like masks on, all of that process in place. So luckily that was actually quite nice. For me personally, the one thing I really valued about running, and I still value about running this business with my sisters, was especially during lockdown, it gave me an opportunity to actually spend time with my siblings and my mum. And I think without Puff Puff Ministry, without us running a business during lockdown, that would have been almost impossible to actually see your friends, see your family. So that's something that was really, really beneficial to me, and probably like kept me sane for most of lockdown, to be honest.
So are you based at the chocolate factory in
just next door to it? Yeah, we're in Calm.
Okay.
So it's they run a bunch of commercial kitchens, so we're in the shared kitchen.
And what's that like? So is there interaction with the other kitchens at all? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we've been there for 4 years now, so we've seen like so many businesses come and go. And some of them we're still connected with. It really has actually just helped us expand our business network as well. So it typically works. I mean, we've sort of, because Karma Kitchen has also grown in those 4 years, like they have tons of branches now around London. So we've sort of seen the kitchen structure shift a little bit. So typically where we are right now, so the shared kitchen now in Woodgreen is slightly smaller than the one we started in. So it's usually just like us and one other business at any given time. And sometimes it's just us in there, depending on like shift times. So there's always like a schedule. You have your agreed shift. So you sort of know who's going to be in there if anyone is going to be in there. So it just makes it easier to actually plan. For a growing business, it has been super beneficial for us because it's the most affordable option, because you don't have to get your own equipment. You just literally go in with your ingredients and everything, and you produce and you go home. So, obviously right now we've definitely outgrown the shared space. So we are looking to get a private kitchen of our own, but it's so expensive. So we're trying to take it slow.
You might as well just take over your parents' house. They'd love that, I'm sure.
Oh my gosh. I think Father would actually never forgive us for doing that.
Is he the only man in the family?
But yeah, Dad is, yeah.
Okay, bless him. So in terms of the funding then, so when you guys were starting out 2019, 2020, how did you decide to split it? Because like you say, you've got different family commitments, different work commitments, rents or mortgages. How did you decide to fund it as a group?
Yeah, that is a good question. Do you know what? We didn't actually go into any sort of strict, Marianne drops this amount, Yossie dropped this amount. I think we always, and this is how we are as sisters as well, because every single person is different and has different commitments, like you said. So it was very much like I contributed what I felt I could contribute or what I wanted to contribute. I don't actually, funny enough, I can't even tell you right now the exact amount that we put into the business as a group. We just funneled money into it at that initial process. We paid for our logo designer, we paid very much for that first year. If there was a need for an influx of cash and we had it in our savings, we will just send that. I think we did try to start a spreadsheet once, track, just because it's director's loans. I don't even know where that spreadsheet is right now. It's probably somewhere in our Google Drive, but I haven't opened it in years. So at some point, we'll probably have to go figure out, okay, how much has each person contributed? But Yoss actually does all the finance and accounting, so she might have a more structured response to that question.
No, I think, the structured response is probably to go and check the tags in the bank accounts and, give us a summary of how much, we've put in the business as directors' capital, and then just filter it based on who's given the money. But no, Marianne's absolutely right. We didn't really have a set amount. We just said, okay, these are the things that we need to spend on. This is what it's going to cost. What can everyone contribute? And then we did it that way. But luckily for us as a business, within the first month, we started making sales. And so we found that we didn't actually have to keep putting money into the business consistently from the beginning. Because I think by month 3, we were already shipping across the country. And so did we start with 2 or 3 dates in a week, Marianne? I don't remember, but we were shipping at least twice a week or so. And so the business was funding itself. But obviously there have been times where, sales have been low and we've had bills to pay and we don't have the money in the account. So it's like, okay, who has money to drop on, what do we need? And then we all kind of split it between ourselves. But yeah, thankfully we're in a place where consistently, month by month, we're not really having to put money into the business because it's funding itself. Can't say that the business is funding itself enough to pay back the director's capital that we put in there, but at least we're able to pay our monthly expenses as a business.
Okay. And you're the first guest we've had on who have a product as opposed to a service and a perishable product. So I just want to understand a little bit. You sort of said, you're using the Royal Mail. I mean, we've all had issues with Royal Mail. How has that worked for you? I mean, is that something that, I guess it's a unionized organization. So it can, you just don't know what's happening with the Royal Mail. But anyway, has that affected the business in any way?
I wouldn't say affected per se. We have had times where Royal Mail has been really busy. For example, Christmas is a very busy time. Expect problems during December. And with lockdown, I think initially things were quite smooth, but sometimes there were particular areas across the country where, for whatever reason, Royal Mail was just not delivering packages in those areas. So we would have customers who pay for something and expect to receive something, and they're like, I haven't received my package. It's been 3 days. And the tracker is just showing, Royal Mail has collected the parcel. And we're like, my goodness. And it's very expensive to, I'll track back. It's very expensive to ship. What we actually charge customers for shipping is less than what Royal Mail charges us for shipping. And so, and again, because the perishable product, we need to send it on the same day for it to arrive the next day. So the same day it's produced, Royal picks up, it gets to customers the next day, because we just need that quick of a turnaround time. And so we're paying a premium to get our product to customers the next day. So customers have paid quite a lot of money. I think it's £8 for special delivery guaranteed the next day. And Royal Mail does not deliver. And we're thinking, my goodness. And at the beginning, actually, we were subsidizing this quite a bit. I think we were even charging like £5, where Royal Mail was charging us, say, £10. And that's gone up, considering, inflation and everything. So just imagine, we're already making a loss and Royal Mail is not delivering. And then we have to refund the customer because, unfortunately, Royal Mail hasn't delivered. And then they return the product to us, but we can't do anything with it. So it goes into the bin. So it was just, so there are some times where we have these issues, but again, it's not all the time. I mean, it's a challenging one, and we've actually had situations and times where we've had to leave Royal Mail to try other courier services. For example, we've tried DPD, we've tried DHL. Did we try DHL at some point? And we've come back to Royal Mail because ultimately, despite the challenges, Royal Mail is better than the alternatives. However, we've recently actually found a new partner that only delivers within London, I believe. I think they're called Fleet. So they, I don't know what their operations is like, but what we found is that sometimes the products arrive better when it's delivered through Fleet, even though it's the same thing. They pick up on the day it's made, deliver the next day. But I think their handling is just much better than Royal Mail, because Royal Mail, mass market, just chuck everything in a box. And
Fleet is very much like tech-ish startup kind of vibe. So, I think they just have that more modern and structured approach to it. So even with Royal Mail, it has been a journey, especially like you said, with perishable products. Like Yossie has said, it is not cheap to send perishable products across the country. But ultimately, the reason we're always going to stick with Royal Mail is because Royal Mail gets to every corner of the country. And that is really the essence of why we even offer the opportunity to get Puff anywhere in the UK. So Fleet is great for the London postcodes, but ultimately, if someone in Wales or Scotland and Northern Ireland wants Puff, we can still deliver to them through Royal Mail. And it has been a journey for us as well. We started with Royal Mail with Tracked 24, which still gives you the option to track. But then we found that sometimes they will prioritize the parcels that were special delivery guaranteed, which is why we then had to switch to special delivery guaranteed, because also, if you send it by a special delivery and they fail to deliver the next day, you can actually get a refund on that. Whereas with Track 24, it was a bit, hit or miss, basically. So honestly, the postal thing, and the way we've actually dealt with that problem, though, is by offering collection, especially around Christmas time, because we always try and make sure that the last postal date for Christmas is a few days before Christmas Day itself, just to account for any delays. And like I said, we also offer collections every Christmas Eve, like 23rd and 24th of December, and also every Saturday from our kitchen. So that's just how we make sure that, people can still get their Puff. And also people travel from far afield to come to collect Puff. It blows our minds every single time. I can't even believe it sometimes. But so, we get by, basically.
No, I think it's an interesting one. And I know that you mentioned events and that you said that you do some events. Is it sort of corporate events, festivals? What kind of events is it?
Yeah, so because we launched in the pandemic, obviously, we had a lot of sales during that period of lockdown. And we saw that once lockdown was lifted, people were desperate to just be outside. There was a dip, and we saw this across the board as well for other delivery businesses, other companies that post desserts. I guess the first thing is some people had less disposable income. And the second one was that people were just desperate to be outside. They weren't really sending parcels to family and friends anymore because they were hardly home. They wanted to just go be at events. So we did have to pivot the business very quickly to B2B, because we always were a direct-to-consumer business. The way we did that was actually by utilizing the existing customers that we had. Because of the price point of Puff and our Puff specifically, we know that a lot of our customers are professionals and they do have that extra disposable income. And so we then switched our marketing approach, speaking to those customers and saying, hey, let your company know that you want puff puff at work. Just like some of that messaging was, using our customers as always as our biggest advocate. And so like encouraging them to do the same in their workplaces. So that was actually how we've been able to build our B2B model. So a lot of that now is corporate clients. So for the most part, we're doing private events where a company books puff puff ministries to come into their office or just to deliver some boxes. Or as we did recently with Google, we actually went in to teach them how to make puff puff. And it was like a puff puff masterclass where everyone got to make their own box of puff puff. So we've actually been able to expand, puff puff ministries offering so much. And it's very diverse. And I really love all the different ways that we actually make it possible for people to get puff puff now. So you could also, we also do private family events. So if someone's having, sadly, we actually get quite a few funeral orders as well. But also birthdays, weddings. So really it feels, I'm getting goosebumps people talking about it because so many people are choosing Puff Puff Ministry to be part of their family events and part of their lives really. So the event is, a mix of corporate clients, but also private events. And recently we have been testing actually selling to the general public through festivals and markets. So we did our first one in May this year at Spitalfields Market. And then we did a conference about 2 weeks ago in Shoreditch. So we have a few more of those in the pipeline. So that's really how we're diversifying our income stream as a business.
And you touched on the demographics, like a lot of them in terms of like the economic, where they are economically. In terms of marketing to a market that's predominantly familiar with your product already, so like Africans, etc., how are you finding that on social media? Because that isn't, sometimes you can't select by race, for example. You can only select by gender and age, and it's quite difficult to.
No, I was going to say that's an interesting question. While a lot of our customers are from the Black community, West African heritage, we're actually not marketing just to that community. We're marketing to the country, and we know that the UK is a very diverse country, and so that's why, going back to the beginning, we said Puff Puff exists in variations across the world. So from the very first day, we knew that yes, with a name like Puff Puff Ministry, West Africans would know immediately what we're selling. But how do we get other people, other communities in the UK to know what we're selling? And so we came up with this idea of a Puff Puff glossary, so Puff Puff around the world. And what we tried to do was we researched what Puff Puff or its variation was called in different cultures. So even in countries like Turkey and Greece, in different African countries, which country is it called? Mandazi. So in Ghana, it's Buffered. In Turkey, is it Lokma? In Greece, it's the Kumades. So what we did was we tried to find what Puff Puff means or something like Puff Puff. I think in India it's Gulab Jamun as well. So we have this special, it's on our website. And so what we try to do is, Puff Puff is, it's like a donut. And that's where our tagline came from, like donuts but better, telling people what it is. So we find that we try to be as generic as possible. We obviously have kept to our West African heritage, saying Puff 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 Ministry, but we add sort of in brackets what it means in English or how to understand what it means. So West African donuts, or like donuts but better, or fried dough balls, so that people know what they're getting. So we haven't found it tricky at all with the language. We're just saying, and we one of the interesting demographics actually that buy from us, I think white or British English people who are married or in relationships with people of African heritage. So they know what Puff Puff is, or is equivalent in their partner's, culture. So they know what it is. And so it's something that they're probably also familiar with, or they've tried to make at home. So what we try to do with our storytelling, actually, and Marianne can speak more to this, is we try to think about different scenarios in which people might enjoy Puff Puff or know of Puff Puff. So if you're of African heritage, you probably knew, okay, growing up, this is something that you used to have at church, at gatherings, at parties. If you're from a different culture that's not West African, but you have something similar, what we market it as is a taste of home. So this is something that you may be familiar with based on your culture and your tradition. So based on that scenario planning, we're able to sort of tailor the marketing and the messaging, and the storytelling and the narrative depending on the audience.
Also, one thing I would add to that, in terms of reaching because our customer base is predominantly Black, British, Black African people, ultimately, we have actually found that because, I might pat myself on the shoulder here, because we've done really well with marketing and storytelling, we've been able to turn our community/customers into advocates for the brand. And so oftentimes they are helping us spread that message within their community. So I will say that word of mouth has been one of the strongest things for us to actually be known across the Black, British, Black African community in the UK and even globally as well. We have family friends who have been to the US and Canada, and they'd be like, oh yeah, I was at a dinner party and everyone was talking about Puff Puff Ministry. And we're like, what? We actually heard from someone recently that in Nigeria, there's a university that is using Puff Puff Ministry as a case study to teach their students. So I don't even know. I guess that's just the power of social media and the internet and really good brand storytelling. But it has gone and it's spread very, very far, which, so in some ways, having done that groundwork from the very beginning with marketing is paying off for us in terms of people then just becoming advocates for Puff Puff Ministry and spreading the word for us.
And in terms of the future, are you thinking more spreading your geographical reach, or are you thinking more products potentially, like different products, bringing those into the market? So what would you do first? I guess you'll do both, but what would you do first?
Yeah, the first thing, that's such a good question, actually, because we have two options right now as to how we move forward. I would say the first thing that we are actively working towards is establishing a physical presence in the UK. What we're trying to determine is that going to be something that is a perfect blend of production, kitchen and shop, or is it going to be full on shop the dream is Covent Garden, somewhere where there's really high footfall of Londoners and tourists alike. So that would ultimately be the dream. So what we're doing now is just trying to test that concept in any way that we can. And ultimately to do that, we will need to raise investment. So that's where we are right now in terms of the next stage of the business. We've done very well with establishing ourselves online and in communities across London and the UK. But now we want to establish that physical presence to really create that full West African experience for people.
Okay, so then you're thinking maybe a few pop-ups, there's that pop-up concept that seems to work quite well. I think Chukwu's did that initially, the Seven Sisters place. Yeah, exactly. So I think it can, then they ended up with a space, and Kickstarter's worked well in terms of establishing a place for Yolandi Brown. So there's different models, I guess, in terms of crowdfunding that you could do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Chukwu's, because Chukwu's, and there's also a Caribbean company called Sweet Leash Jack. They also started up as street food, and now they have locations that are more in Selfridges and Vauxhall, I think. So we know that formula works really well. So it's just about testing that concept and just trying to capture the data that we need to prove that to potential investors as well.
I think it's interesting that you want Covent Garden. Why Covent Garden? Or what drew you to that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, personally, haven't lived in London since 2007 when we moved here, and also I myself, I would say I'm quite into food. So I love, and when you look at the London landscape, so it's either Covent Garden or Liverpool Street. I would say Covent Garden because even when you think about brands like Curb Food, they're based in Covent Garden. There's a massive food market there. Covent Garden is already very much a food hub for London, and also because you can reach those tourists as well. It's really where you go for dessert. Down the road from Covent Garden is Chinatown. It's just this perfect hub, no matter where you're coming from in the city, it feels like that perfect middle point in some ways. And if you want to come to Covent Garden for food, you can still do your shopping or vice versa. So it just is the best place for us to start. Obviously, it's going to be so expensive to get a shop in Covent Garden. But like I said, that is the big dream. Maybe we're not going to start there. Maybe we'll start somewhere more local and then eventually move to Covent Garden. But I would say that's, a dream location.
I like the thought of Spitalfields, and I like Borough Market as well. So when I think food, I actually think Borough. If I'm going to go and try some stuff, yeah. So it's interesting that we all have different ideas, but I think Covent Garden, yeah, it's constant. You will never sort of worry about footfall, etc. Whereas Borough Market certain days. So you'd be thinking, okay, yeah, covering, well, it's not rent, but yeah, covering that space would be a bit different. Okay, then. And then in terms of different products, is that something that you're exploring as well?
No, I was going to say, yeah, we're constantly thinking, for example, in relation to finding a private space and a dedicated space, we're also thinking, how can we expand the West African cultural experience? And so in the last 2 years, we've run some of our own events. So West African Cultural Connection events, where we've hosted other West African creators to sell at our events, just so people could have a space where they could come, chill, meet people, engage in conversations, network, discover new West African heritage brands. So what we're thinking is not so much additional products, but also improving the experience. So when you come to Puff Puff Ministry, our space to engage in the delight of Puff Puff, and there are other West African heritage products that you may be able to experience as well. So that's the way that we're thinking about it, not necessarily products, but how do we help people engage fully or immerse themselves in a West African cultural experience through food and drink, music, art, body products, different things, just a full experience of West African heritage.
Yeah, I love that. I would say like that's honestly, it perfectly sums up what Puff Puff Ministry is. Like, yes, we are producing Puff Puff. Ultimately, we think of this business as being a West African cultural experience business. And that's why we love that word experience. At some of our events, we've served meat pies and chin chin. We recently had a client, one of our corporate clients came back to us and asked for a Puff Puff and champagne bar at their event. They were having I think a meeting with a few employees. And that was the first time that, we've actually served drinks as well as Puff Puff. And, immediately we were like, oh my gosh, like a Puff Puff and champagne bar, like that's incredible. That would go down so well at weddings, at any type of celebration. So it's about just how can we continue to elevate this experience through the lens of West African food. And that's really the thing that we're always trying to answer. When we did launch, and even occasionally, we have had, we've posted a few TikToks that have gone viral and then received some backlash, people saying, oh, you've bastardized Puff Puff, this is an abomination. Why would you put chocolate on Puff Puff? It was fine as it was. And it's here's the thing, and this is actually something we feel very, very strongly about, and we did from the very beginning. The reason why we only add toppings to the Puff Puff is because it's really important for us to maintain that essence of the Puff Puff taste. And the way we think about it is, if someone encounters Puff Puff for the first time through Puff Puff Ministry, we want them to then, if they decide to travel across West Africa and they decide to order some Puff Puff from the roadside, I want it to taste the same as Puff Puff Ministry's Puff Puff. And so that's why we never want to change the flavors of the Puff Puff itself. We're simply adding, some extra pizzazz to it through the chocolate toppings. So that's really how we sort of find the perfect balance between those two. And again, and that's also why we're always, always, always going to serve and have plain Puff Puff on our menu. Funny enough, even though we get a lot of backlash on TikTok, especially when we have viral videos, people don't often realize that our best-selling Puff Puff is either plain or cinnamon sugar, mostly plain. Ultimately, most people are ordering plain Puff Puff. And if they then want that extra oomph, they'll go for some cinnamon sugar and Biscoff. Those are our 3 best-selling flavors. So ultimately, the Biscoff is so good. That is honestly my favorite one.
Do you think the fact that you guys have been here, less than 20 years, has affected the way that you think about business at all? So you're not coming from a completely Black British, education and background. Do you think that's maybe had an influence?
Yeah. No, I don't. But I don't think. Well, that's an interesting question. The way I want to answer is this: we come from a long line of entrepreneurs. Our mum ran a business. Our grandfather ran a business. Our dad even dabbled into business once or twice. So it's never really been a cultural thing. It's always been the fundamentals of business. You make a product or you have a service. You sell. You have an audience, you do your marketing, develop your product or your service. So we've never thought about it from a cultural aspect. It's ultimately just been coming from a long line of business people, of entrepreneurs. How do you run a successful business? From the fundamentals or the basics? The cultural aspect for us, I think it's more so really in everything we've said before. It's the storytelling, it's the narrative. We're bringing a cultural product into the UK market. We know that Indian cuisine, Chinese cuisine is really popular. Thai cuisine is popular in the UK. West African cuisine is really just in its heyday. So how do we bring something that is also cultural into this market where people don't, when they're not really familiar? I know people, I've raised jollof rice and they make jokes about jollof rice, but there's so much more to African, particularly West African cuisine, than just jollof rice. And so for us, that's where the cultural element of the business comes in. It's not so much in our mindset of how we run a business. That is ultimately the fundamentals, the basics, but it's, we're bringing a cultural product. How do we make sure that this is a successful product in a market where there's so many other cuisines to compete with? So that's then where we think, okay, who are we targeting? How do we make sure that this product appeals to not just the West Africans or the Black community, but also anybody who happens upon our business? And if you think about a lot of our corporate clients, actually, a lot of the people that enjoy Puff Puff at corporate gigs are actually they're not Black, they're not West African. It's a very diverse group of people. So it's really, how do we make this product appeal to everyone, even though it's ultimately a cultural West African heritage product?
Okay. And I suppose you've already got the story because obviously it's a recipe, family recipe. Your mum was a baker, so you've got that. The story of the brand and how it's made is like very sort of compelling, so that helps. In terms of, have you thought about? I know you've thought about it, but in terms of things like supermarket shops, that kind of thing, or are you very much still wanting to be close to the customer in terms of like having your own shop as opposed to it being in other people's?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, because I think last year we got approached by a production company to appear on TV, Aldi's Next Big Thing, this TV show on Channel 4. And so they got in touch with us saying, hey, we found you guys online and we think you'd be great to come on the show to pitch your Puff Puff to be stocked in 1,000 Aldi supermarkets across the country. And when we got that email, we were a bit hesitant to do it because the focus was always establish a physical shop and sell Puff Puff to people so they can experience West African culture in that space. So we hadn't really thought about going into the supermarket until we got this email from them. We actually pulled out of the process at the very beginning, partly because we're very unsure if that was the right move for us, but also secondly because when we had meetings with the production company, they started expressing suggestions like maybe you can come into the pitch wearing your traditional African attire or doing a dance. And it's just a bit icky because if I'm not wearing traditional Nigerian clothing on a random Wednesday at home, why would I then do that all of a sudden because I'm on national TV? And also asking us to come in if there's like a cultural dance we can do. Our culture is not a gimmick. It's very, very weird. And they even suggested things like, oh, could you serve the Puff Puff in newspapers to show that it's a street snack? We have never shown our Puff Puff in newspapers. So why would we do that now because we are on national TV? Like, I'm sorry, but no. So we just had a few concerns about any preconceived notions that they had or how they wanted to present our business. And so that was the second reason why we pulled out the process. But we then had a meeting with them and thought about it some more and realized that because our mission is to hopefully make Puff Puff one of the UK's next favorite desserts and really make sure that people know what Puff Puff is in the same way people know churros, empanadas. Like, these are all cultural foods that everyone around the world knows and loves, even Jamaican patties as well, so that is ultimately our mission. And so having talked to our mum, we realized that yes, okay, going on the show and having the potential to be stocked in 1,000 supermarkets across the country is a fantastic way, almost like a shortcut to get to that mission. And so that's actually why we chose to go in the end. And honestly, we were all very nervous to watch the show when it aired in April this year because we weren't sure how they were going to edit it. But I honestly thought it was perfect. I was so pleasantly surprised just because we had that hiccup at the beginning. I just wasn't sure. So maybe it was like a different team entirely editing that. So shout out to that team. But I thought, they presented it so perfectly. Like, I had no notes. Like, if I had to give feedback, there would be like nothing that I could have said. So yeah, it was honestly like really great. We made it to the final two in the show, which was a huge shock to Yossi and I when we were on there, because there were other companies that were more supermarket ready than Puff Puff Ministry was. They already had packaging, they already had a manufacturer, whereas ours is still made by hand, by the family. So asking, Aldi was asking for 60,000 boxes of Puff Puff. Yeah. So it was quite challenging. So anyway, the point is, when it comes to supermarket, I would say that we're not in a hurry to be in a supermarket, especially if it requires that type of skill. If we found like a small independent shop, or just small independent grocery stores where we could actually easily make that Puff Puff and maintain our really good shelf life and the freshness, then I think we will consider that. But a situation like 1,000 shops across the country, that makes it quite challenging, to fulfill that and still maintain the high quality.
Yeah, I think there's something there around integrity of the brand and also the story, because obviously, yes, like you say, it would be brilliant. It would sort of like catapult you, but then you might have some sort of like product quality issues because it's just scaled too fast, too quick. You can't really control how they're storing things, how they're doing it, in each and every Aldi, although I'm sure they've got like their own quality assurance processes. So I think there is something about the integrity. And I think as people are trying to grow businesses, that's something that can easily be lost in the journey, is like the integrity of like, this is why I started this and this is what I want it to look like, because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, if I sell this, then I can easily make my money back really quickly, but then the brand is lost. So that's really good of you guys. I'm glad it was a positive experience in the end. I think producers are always going to do that. They're always going to stereotype because they have to kind of have like a gimmick. It's like angry black woman, sort of like sexy blonde. There's always those kind of people on those shows that like they have to sort of box you into something. And so they were like, oh yeah, West Africans, they can sing, they can dance, they can pop up. In their minds it was a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, for me, I would say, like, no hard feelings, because they're just doing their job. And like you said, integrity is the key word here. So our job as the founders of the business is we need to do our job too and be like, hey, no, that's not the way we're going. So yeah, it was really important. And so yeah, we understood where they were coming from. It's what makes good TV, but it's just not on our watch, basically.
So what advice would you give to other people who are thinking about starting something in this field? Because I think it's sort of that, like I say, perishable products, it's quite a specific area. What advice would you give someone who's thinking about doing it, maybe for their own cultural dish or something?
I'm just going to say, I think the first thing would be to understand and know fully what your story is and your why. Why are you trying to start this business? What is the beyond making money from a business? Like, what is that compelling factor that will carry you through? Because working in the food industry is not easy. It's you're standing for long hours. You're on your feet for long hours. There's a lot of high intensity labor that's involved in working in the food industry. So you need to have something compelling so that when you get to those days where you're thinking, oh my goodness, I need to quit this business because it's just taking a toll on me, you remember your why. So start with the why. What is that story? So for us, this is a legacy thing. It's not beyond the profitability of the business. It's a legacy thing. We grew up in a bakery. Our mom's bakery allowed us to have so many opportunities in life. And so for us, it's thinking about the next generation. So that's our why. What is your why? That's the first sort of, lofty thing that I would say. The second thing that is really, really important is you need to do your research. For us, and that's why people say, we had to fully understand, if we're going to run a food business, what are the things that we need? You need to have your food hygiene and safety certificate, because you need to know how to handle food. Food is a life or death matter. If someone has an allergy and you don't pay attention to that, you could literally cause death. And so you need to understand all the different things that you need to have in place, different training, certificates, any regulation, any cover, any insurance, any policy, just anything that is important in the food industry, in the perishable goods industry. What are those things? Understand what your specific ones are. We don't deal with meat, for example, so we don't have to think about some of those things, but the other things that we deal with nuts. And so what are the processes in place that we need to have to make sure that if we have someone who has a nut allergy, just placed an order, how do we make the order separately from the other orders so to avoid cross-contamination. So it's all those little things that we had to research, and that's why we had to find a commercial kitchen immediately, because we couldn't keep producing from the kitchen at home, because they're all these things that you need to have in place. You need to have your what is it called, Marianne, your food hygiene rating, where they actually come to your space and monitor and see if you're actually meeting all the requirements to operate a food business. And the ideal number or rating is 5, right? So you don't want to be a business that's got 1, 2, or 3. I mean, maybe 4 is fine, but really the ideal is 5. And so what kind of space do you need to make sure that you have that ideal rating? So those are the very practical things that I would say you need to have in place if you're thinking about starting a food business.
That's good. When are you going to do gluten-free? Just selfishly.
Funny, everything Yossie just said is also the reason why we're not quite there yet, because with gluten-free it is even more high risk. And when we're operating in just one small kitchen, we will need to be able to have a separate corner of the kitchen just for gluten-free. Like, we can't mix those two because it is so risky. And it's really frustrating because we actually, during the process of being on Aldi's Next Big Thing, we actually got the chance to meet some recipe developers who have been in the game for decades and decades. And one of them actually said that puff puff, because of the texture, lends itself really well to being gluten-free. It's a bit more cake-like than the classic donuts. So we know it's possible. And we've seen on recipes online, people have done gluten-free puff puff, but it's just from a production standpoint that makes it really tricky right now. So as we grow, it's because we get asked this question a lot, and I would love to do that. But hopefully if we can get into a bigger production kitchen and we can just allocate a certain part of that kitchen for gluten-free only, at that point, then we can consider it. Yeah.
I think it's a hard one, and it's interesting because a lot of pizza places are, claim to be gluten-free, and I struggle with that because obviously the flour is just in the same space. So how are you ensuring? Luckily, most people aren't celiac. If you're celiac, then it's really, really dangerous. So traces are fine, but it's really confusing to me unless they have a separate oven, they have a separate whatever. And I know, let's say the Pizza Hut down the road from me doesn't have separate anything, so how they make sure that it's completely gluten-free, it's a little bit perplexing. So I'm glad that's at the back of your minds, that when we have the space we can think about that. But for now, even the nut-free thing, it's really difficult because some people just airborne traces of nuts can be, ridiculous for them. So, it is a really difficult thing. Well, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening for me. And I think for the viewers as well, because like I say, it's the first product and a perishable product of that. So it's very, very different. Most people are, service oriented. It's very much kind of things that can be done from home, online. So this is really interesting because you're talking about real investments moving forward in terms of having to find spaces, having to, invest to grow the business. So where can people find you? I mean, I've been to the website, but
Yeah. So our website is, that's our home, that's our internet home. However, if you want to really follow along on the Puff Puff Ministry journey, I would highly recommend our Instagram primarily, or our TikTok as well. That's where we really show a lot of behind the scenes, and really just that's where you can really see our personality and follow that business growth. So Instagram at Puff Puff Ministry, TikTok at Puff Puff Ministry, Twitter, we didn't have enough characters for the whole Puff Puff Ministry name, so it's just at Puff Puff Minist, and it ends there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Yossie and Marianne, for taking the time to speak to the Black Income Creators audience today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.